Hey everyone, and welcome. My name is Dr. Ray Pastor, and today I'm going to be talking about taking your objectives and your content and actually, forming them into some kind of organizational strategy so that everything's organized. Let's see, let me just make sure that I can see your comments if you're going to be commenting. Just get everything opened up. Let's see. There we go. All right. Let's see. Looks like everything is up. Okay. Perfect. All right. So, what I'm going to be talking about is I want to, last week what I did is I talked about the objectives and task analysis. And what I really want to do is just make it so that today I'm going to talk about, taking that to the next level and taking your objectives and your task analysis and actually forming them into your content and how you start thinking about that. I'm not going to go into depth on it because, a lot of my students in my class right now are not, if you guys are on watching, you're not, a lot of them are new, brand new instructional designers. They haven't had their basic instructional designer class yet. And so what I want to do is make sure that they understand some basic concepts of, starting to think about designing instruction, because this is really the instructional design part that I'm talking about, the learning part, and how do you actually get there and how do you do it. Okay, so having said that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually, let's see, just want to show my desktop here. And for those of you who are just listening, I'll be able to describe everything just fine that you're seeing, but I just want to make sure that everyone can see it. And if you're listening via podcast, you'll be able to hear it as well. Okay, so what I have here is just a basic, task analysis up on the screen. Like I have, so you see you have your instructional goal, which is what you come up with after your needs assessment, right? You do a needs assessment, you figure out what the problem is, and you create this instructional goal. From there, you divide out your goal into all your tasks. So you have your task analysis. So I have like step 1, step 2, step 3, whether it's procedural, whether there's some kind of hierarchy, however your tasks work out. You break them down into all of your levels. This is what I talked about last week. What we do from here is we write our learning objectives, right? And, the way I teach learning objectives is I teach them in what's called ABCD format, right? I mean, that's how I was taught them. It's what, basically, regardless of how you're taught them, you're looking at ABCD, which is your audience, behavior, condition, and degree. Those 4 things. And obviously, when I write them, an example I have here up on the screen is an example good learning objective is given a map of the United States, which is our condition, the learner, who is our audience, will be able to identifies our behavior, the state of North Carolina with 100% accuracy. That's our degree. Now, when writing an objective, I don't always include who the user is or the degree, because if it's just always 100%, I don't need to continuously write that. So in practice, I never write that. But when I'm having students do it, I want them to write it so they understand what it is. And then we have our audience. I might not always include either because I know it's always going to be my learners. Okay, so those are our objectives. So we have our task analysis and objectives. We talked about that last week. I answered some questions for those of you in my class who are watching. That was your assignment, to create your objectives and everything for last week. So what we're talking about now is actually starting to develop content. Now, usually in the instructional design process, once I have my objectives created, I create my assessment items right away. So I want to make that clear that usually when I create my objectives, I create my assessment items right away. The way I teach my current class is I have them do their objectives, Then I have them do their content, then their assessment items, just because it works that way. It works better in my course to do it that way. But realistically, I develop my assessment items before my content. I'm just kind of doing it a little backwards in my course because it makes sense to do it that way. So how do we do that? All right. So what we do is there are these things called instructional strategies. And instructional strategies, when I say that term, it means something different to a lot of different people. We've done a really poor job in the field defining what instructional strategies are, because if I ask a teacher or ask an instructional designer, and depending on where they're working, what they're doing, what an instructional strategy is, I'm going to get some different answers. So there are 3 types of instructional strategies that I like to talk about. There are organizational strategies, delivery strategies, and development strategies. 3 types of it. So, and the reason that I get different answers is because some people were just taught an instructional strategy was only one of these 3 types, not the other 2. And then what this does by not differentiating the types of instructional strategies, people get really confused how to actually do instructional design well. This is one of the things I see during when I'm interviewing someone or I'm talking to a new instructional designer that they don't grasp. This is the piece they don't really get. So in my course, I'm not requiring my students to incorporate any instructional strategies into their content, because their point of my class is to really learn to develop objectives and assessment items based on it. The content's kind of they almost can write it like an encyclopedia. But for since there are new students in the course, I want to teach them a little bit about these instructional strategies so they can start to think about that. So when they start taking their more advanced classes, they're going to get, this is why I actually do this. All right. So 3 types of instructional strategies: organizational, delivery, and development. So let's talk about the 3 types. So an organizational instructional strategy is simply an instructional strategy. Let me make this a little bigger here on the screen for those of you who are watching. If you're just listening, I'm going to talk through it anyway. So an organizational instructional strategy is a strategy that tells us this is how we're going to organize our content. This is how things are going to be organized. This is how this is what our course or our lesson or whatever it is we're teaching is going to be organized. So think about if I was a teacher and I was developing a lesson plan. An organizational strategy is very similar to a lesson plan. For those of you who are instructional designers that have had a few courses and are watching this, an example organizational strategy is Gagne's 9 events. So Gagne's 9 events is an organizational strategy. It helps us organize a course. All right, so that's an organizational strategy. Delivery strategies are typically what people, when I say the word instructional strategies, this is typically what people think of. When I say a delivery strategy is what people think of are instructional strategies, they like to think of as a delivery strategy. So that's usually when I ask someone what is an instructional strategy, they're going to give me some delivery strategies and say lectures an instructional strategy or videos an instructional. They are, but they're a certain type of instructional strategy. They're delivery strategies. So examples of delivery strategies are problem-based learning, activities, worksheets, video, playing games, having the students do a worksheet. Tests, like quizzes, can be various forms of delivery strategies. Assignments, projects, homework. Any activity you've ever done in school where the teacher was trying to get you to learn, that's a delivery strategy. All right, and then what is a development strategy? A development strategy is how you're going to actually develop your content. So the multimedia principles. So an example of that, and just it's more of the style for those of you that are new and don't even know what those are yet. That's the style. Do I use images and text, and where do I use them, and what are best practices for color, and what are my strategies for development to get people to learn through the development. So there are 3 types of instructional strategies: organizational, delivery, development. And if you guys online, if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask. but I'm kind of, basically I see some new people coming on. So what I'm talking about is how to start to organize your content, because I realize a lot of my students are brand new and have not had the they haven't had instructional design courses yet, so they're not sure how to really organize content. And I find this is one challenge that I think instructional designers in general have a problem doing. So I think for my students in my class, the most important part of this is to start thinking about an organizational strategy for your content. So I have an example on the screen here, and what I actually do, so I'm writing a book on instructional design right now. This is a piece of it. So this is the draft version that you're seeing. And for those of you listening, basically what I have up on the screen here is I have Dick and Carey's organizational strategy. And what I've actually done earlier in this is I've actually compared multiple organizational strategies against one another to show how, regardless of which one you're using, they all explain the exact same thing. So in order to organize content, usually you start with an introduction. And I have Gagne's 9 events and Dick and Carey's organizational strategies up on the screen here, and I'll kind of talk through. So the first part is introduction. All instructional organizational strategies have some kind of introduction. That's where we gain learners' attention somehow by, having an exciting story. Like, think about when you're going to watch a documentary like on aliens. The beginning of that documentary, they're going to show like the alien, or like a Bigfoot documentary. Like the beginning, they get you in, they get you to want to watch the rest of it. Learning is no different. So we start learning by gaining the learner's attention. This pre-instructional, this is our introduction. Next thing we do is we tell the people, this is what you're going to do. This is what you're going to learn today. We give them, it's the introduction. We gain their attention. We tell them what they're going to learn. So that's how we start. That's how we start organizing content. Next step, we get to our content presentation. So this is where learning actually takes place. And, if I'm developing a documentary, it's no different. Communication versus learning are very, very, very similar. We think about that. They're extremely similar things. So, there's not that much of a difference. So we have this introduction, and now we go to our content presentation or our learning. So what do we do during content like with learning? This is where, we actually present the material. And this is where they learn. There's going to be feedback. We might have them doing various activities. There's going to be lots of formative type assessments like homework, question and answer, reflection, discussion. So so the next part of an organizational strategy for content is the learning piece. Now, if you're developing like computer-based instruction that's standalone without a facilitator, there is no discussion, but you're still going to have activities. So those activities, this is where you do your instructional strategies. The content presentation is learning, is where your delivery instructional strategies go. So that we have this overview, this organizational strategy where we organize the content. Within that, we have these delivery strategies. And that's where, like, I might have a case study. I might have the learners play like a mini game, like a quiz game or something. Any kind of strategy, whether it's homework, question and answer, reflection, or I want to implement like problems and cases, like problem-based learning, or a cool simulation that they learn from. Any of this happens in this content presentation phase, regardless of what kind of training I'm doing. If I'm doing a face-to-face course, if I'm doing a computer-based course, an online course, a live course, it doesn't matter. But content presentation happens here. This is where my delivery strategies are incorporated into. All right, so once we've taught the learners, right, there's been some kind of practice, feedback, we've interacted with them somehow, regardless of the type of training we're delivering. Now we have their assessment, where we assess their performance. So let's go into this a little bit. So we have our introduction, where we introduce them. We deliver the content to them. Then we assess the content. So here's our assessment. This is where we have to actually measure how much the people actually learn. How do we do that? We give some kind of assessment, whatever appropriate for the learning objectives we wrote, right? Remember? And one term that I use all the time is instructional congruency. Instructional congruency is when our objectives are in alignment with the type of content we taught, and that's in alignment with our assessment. Instructional congruency. Everything's in alignment. So if my objective was to, as I read earlier, was, given a map of the United States, the learner will be able to identify the state of North Carolina. My content should teach the learner how to identify the state of North Carolina on the map, and my assessment should be assessing that the learner can actually do that. Having the learner draw the state of North Carolina would not meet that objective. The objective was to identify it on a map. Having them draw the state of North Carolina is not meeting that objective. So there has to be congruency there. So my assessment will be congruent with my objectives. All right, so we've assessed them. Now, the final phase of any organizational strategy is transfer, or utilization is what I've termed it here. Basically, that's how are we going to have them take this forward and do anything with this content? What is it? For example, my son's in kindergarten. He's finishing up. Next week's his last week at kindergarten. And, so this year, like at the beginning of the year, they learned how to say the ABCs. I'm trying to keep this very simple. They learned the ABCs. How do they take that? How do we get them to transfer that into the next thing? We have them start learning to read, right? And then we have them take the books home and read. And they go through all these letters of being able to read certain words and making it harder and harder and harder. And so they keep practicing and learning, but they are applying it. It's no different in the workplace. So if I teach someone how to do a skill, there would be no such thing as training if it didn't help them on their job. There has to be some kind of ROI, return on investment, right? So what we want to do is make sure that they can actually take it with them. There are a bunch of ways to do this. That might be giving them a sandbox, which is a play around system that, hey, because sometimes there's a lag. I might have to train someone and they might not be using it for a month or 2 months or 3 months or 6 months, which is a really long time from training to use. We don't like to do that, but sometimes we don't have a choice. So how do we get them to take it to the next level? In a classroom, it might just be applying it to the next lesson or telling but in real life training, it doesn't always work like that. We want them to be able to take it on the job right away. So we might create a bunch of little vignette videos, quick 30-second videos. If I was teaching someone software, they might go through my course, but then I might have a bunch of videos that this is how you this is how you save your file. And so as they're going through on the job and they just forget one little step, they can go back and look at that, that memory, that aid, that job aid, which could be a guide, a written list. It could be a video or something, but I like job aids or something I really like to develop, but it really helps them apply it to the job. I also like to, during my training, explain why it's important for their job too, so they have it. But those are the basic steps of any organizational strategy. Regardless of what one you're using, no matter what kind of course you're delivering, you're going to have an introduction where you gain their attention and inform the learners of what they're doing. You're going to have some kind of content presentation where you're using all these delivery strategies. You're going to have some kind of assessment where you're seeing if your training actually taught the learners anything. And then you're going to have you're going to hopefully have them transfer the learning into something they're doing next. And that's a basic organizational strategy. That's how you start to organize, an actual course around some kind of content that you have. Are there any questions about that so far? I have a couple people on. Haven't seen anything in the chat. I am watching it, so I've got multiple monitors going on so that I can see anything and trying to gauge if you guys are understanding what I'm talking about. That feedback is good for me while I'm going through everything. So then we start to get more complicated in instructional design. And what we do is we take these organizational strategies, and within each of these, I have these delivery strategies. For example, Like in my organizational strategies, the first thing I said was, we have to motivate the learners and get them excited. Well, we have various ways to motivate learners. So, we have like Keller's ARCS model, which teaches us how to motivate learners. Um, when we have our content presentation, we have, problem-based learning, worked examples, lecture, video, activities, worksheets, all these different types of delivery strategies that help us deliver our content. And, I think one of the most confusing things an instructional designer doesn't get is they tell me they're going to use problem-based learning, but they don't have an organizational strategy. Or they tell me they're going to use Gagne's 9 events to design this instruction, but they don't have a delivery instruction in strategy. They like get confused as to when they should be using these things and how many should I be using 10 things, and how do I organize this? And sometimes you'll read like problem-based learning, and the author that's defining it in that context will provide an organizational strategy within their description of how to actually do problem-based learning. So it starts to get confusing for new instructional designers. How do you actually like work this all into real training, into real life? And it doesn't need to be difficult. I just feel like we've done a bad job in our texts. I think they've really done a really bad job of explaining the differences between these things. One of the only texts I've really ever seen it this explained well was Smith and Reagan's book, but they haven't had a new version of their book since 2004, and they might have both, I'm not sure if they both passed away, but I think one of them has, and I know they've well since retired and stuff, and they're not doing this anymore and stuff. So it hasn't really been written about, and that's 15 years old, so their text isn't being used anymore in any universities. We're using other books that aren't explaining it like this, and I'm finding that it's really confusing my senior level students. So it's something I really try to hit on over and over again about how these are applied and when they should be used. But you use your delivery strategy like problem-based learning or game-based learning when your content, objectives, and assessment call for it. You don't just use it because it's fun or cool. I mean, sometimes you do because the client does think it's cool, but that's not really why you always do it. But that's how we start to really apply these things. And then our other types of instructional strategies are our development strategies, which are the multimedia principles, which are like, images are better than text, and when should we use certain colors. Like we start looking at our interface design, and we start looking at our why do we have big buttons versus little buttons. When do we put them like next to each other or away from each other? How do we choose certain colors? How do we, basically all of our styles are part of our delivery strategies. All the things the users are really going to see. How do we deliver it? So someone asked a question that about using Captivate as delivery. So as far as using Captivate as a development tool, I really like, so I think that there are really like two main tools that instructional designers use to develop right now. And there are hundreds out there of other things and reasons why I would use other things. But, if you talk to most instructional designers and say, hey, what software do you use? They're going to say either Captivate or Articulate. And they are basically, Captivate and Articulate are extensions of PowerPoint. They're not really related to PowerPoint at all, but if I had to describe them to someone, I like to say they're PowerPoint on steroids, because they do a lot of things. They're like they do a lot of things you wish PowerPoint did, and they're designed for course development. Now, obviously, for my current class, my students you guys can just use a Word document to deliver the content for your project. You do not need to use Captivate or anything like that. Your project, I'm teaching an assessment class. The class can be 100% via Word. No reason you do not need to use Captivate or anything like that. But I do challenge my more experienced level students, not my new students. My more experienced in the class could use Captivate or another tool because they know how to design and develop, and it's good practice for them to use it. So you wouldn't have to. And as far as like choosing a learning taxonomy, so the next question is about using a learning taxonomy. You don't, when you choose a learning taxonomy, you don't have to use every part of the taxonomy. You use the part of the taxonomy that makes sense for your content. So like if I was, and I'll just choose Bloom's because it's the one most people are most familiar with Bloom's. Like if I was teaching something and it was just all knowledge, maybe that's all my unit is just recall. Like when my kids are, kindergarten, there's tons of stuff that's just recall. And there's lots of problem solving, higher level stuff too, but sometimes it's just knowledge. Sometimes it is just recall. Sometimes that's all it is. It's not, we don't always have to use everything. We have to sometimes ask ourselves, like, I don't want to use I don't want to use stuff for the sake of using it. I want to use it because it makes sense for what I'm doing. And sometimes someone recommends something, like sometimes I'll recommend something or an author will recommend something that you say, well, can I break that rule? Does that make sense for what I'm designing? And if it doesn't make sense and you have an argument against it, you've all of a sudden learned when to break the rules. It's okay to bend and break the rules when you're developing training and instruction. It just has to make sense that you're breaking them in the right place. And someone just posted about their assignment that, yeah, they're going to hammer out that Captivate module in a few days. I get it. It's a summer class and we are in a crunch, and writing it in an encyclopedia format is enough of a project. Believe me, I realize it. Trust me, I know. Because the project you guys are doing is a project I did the project as well. I've done this project as a student. I've adapted it and modified it, but I've done the project. So I know exactly what you're going through, exactly what you're doing, and how it feels and what it's like to go through the process. It's one of the reasons I like the project so much, because when I did it, I realized how much I learned from doing it. And the person who assigned me, had me do the project, who came up with this idea, was absolutely just a brilliant person who I really think did a good job of coming up with the assignment. So any questions out there? Because that was all my content for today. If there's anything else. Yeah, I just wanted to talk about these instructional strategies. And even if you are a more experienced instructional designer, I think just listening to this all the time is really, having someone explain this is really helpful. I go through and reread this stuff all the time. I mean, basically that's where this document you're even seeing on the screen here came from, is me just starting to get my notes that are in my brain, like on paper, so that I can come back and remember, oh yeah, this is what it is. This is how I do this. This is how I say this. This is why I do this. But this is beginning draft of my book, which I will be giving out for free, hopefully by the end of the fall semester. No more charging for materials. College is expensive enough as it is. You guys are working hard. And as far as like developing the content for your project, I think most students that I've seen in this course, I think the most advanced I've ever had is to have some screenshots or images mixed in with the content. I don't think anyone's ever developed a full tutorial. The point of the class is really assessment. So, that's the focus. The content is secondary, totally secondary in this class. Unlike other instructional design courses where it's the most important part. It is secondary in this class. All right, well, we're about at time, so I'm going to log off. Oh yeah, I am pushing free material all the time. I think that there are just so many problems, and maybe I should do a whole video talking about that, but the problem in education is that we push educators to sell all their material. And the problem is the teachers and instructors don't make anything off of it. The publishers, these companies do. So why, when I can cut the company out, why shouldn't I? I don't get anything for having them publish it anyway. Or they might pay me $100 or something, a year, but to charge my students $120 per book, no, it's just not worth it. I believe in open access materials for students. College is expensive enough. It should either the school should provide it, or there are so many alternatives now. So I'm all about getting things. I'd rather have people read it than say, oh, it's $100, I can't afford it. Put it out there for free. So when my book does come out, what I'll probably do is I'm going to publish it on Amazon, and they force you to charge for it. So I'll probably have it on Amazon for whatever the cheapest they sell it for. Like, I don't know if it's like $5 or something, but then I'll have a free copy on my website and like the free PDF version, because it shouldn't cost money. So, yeah, I mean, our libraries pay like $25,000 for a journal that's closed access to the public. Public can't access the information. How does that help get research out? How does that help spread knowledge? And, I'm that's not something I'm a fan of. I want it to be open source and free access, and let people use it and have it and use it the way they want to. So it will be free. It's still in like a very much draft format. So I had planned on finishing it in the spring. That totally didn't happen. I planned on finishing it this summer. That's totally not happening, but it's getting there. It's slowly getting done. I'm getting a couple of hours per week to write. And someone asked about using Powtoon. I think Powtoon's a really cool tool. I've seen some really cool things created with it. I think it's a nice piece of software to get familiar with. So I don't think I think using something like that is worthwhile to learn and give it a try for a course or a project or an assignment. Definitely. Yeah, I'm a big fan. So someone mentioned about open access. I really, really, really am pushing it and believe in it. And I'm going to be, in the next year or two, I'm definitely not going to have any materials in my courses, books that cost money. I'm still using it in this course. I'm still using it in another, but I'm slowly getting rid of all of them. And the ones I am using I'm providing cheap options. Like, I make sure that there's a used version on Amazon for like $5 to $10. I don't mind having students spend $5 on a used book, but 70, 80, 100, 150 when they're taking out loans already, paying for the degree, just not worth it. All right, well, thank you guys. Have a good day, everyone. And my students, I will see you guys online.